Seeing none. I'm sure there'll be questions of staff later on. And there's no reports. There was a request for a deputation for tonight, so if you would like to come forward and make that deputation, you can. Okay. There's a button on the side, and then the
Talk.
Yep. There
you go. Okay, first of all, this is kind of out of my comfort zone. I've done it once already, but it's not something I relish doing, but it's something I really believe in. And so I'm just more or less trying to bring some more information to you guys and try and speak on behalf of a lot of people in the community that may feel the same way as I do. So anyhow, let's get down to business. Good evening, members of Parry Sound Town Council, His Worship Mayor McGarvey, and Parry Sound Town Office staff members. Thank you for allowing us to speak briefly tonight regarding a proposal made in August regarding a splash pad development at Wabano Beach. We've been keeping an eye on budget deliberations over the past few weeks and have noticed our proposal has been deferred from the 2018 budget. While we are disappointed, we understand it's unlikely we'll ever be able to free up that kind of money in one single budget, no matter how hard we plead. Tonight, we are here to respectfully ask Council to give us the go-ahead to start fundraising for the development with the backing of local organizations, businesses, individuals, and anyone else who would like to see this come to fruition sooner than later. We would like to start an official splash pad reserve account set up so that we can start canvassing for donations. The town of Parry Sound, so that the town of Parry Sound is offered to able tax receipts to these donors. We feel a partnership with the town would give us more clout when presenting sponsorship and fundraising opportunities. I've already been contacted by Linda Chase from the Rotary Club of Parry Sound to make a presentation to them on February 6th in regards to helping us fundraise for this cause, and we plan with partnering with many others on this as well. In addition to this, we would also like to ask for a financial commitment from the town to get the ball rolling on this. While it is hard to factor in a specific amount at this time, we propose the town set aside funds over the next 2 to 3 years, possibly starting off with $50,000 this year towards a $275,000 price tag. Our Sound Splash Committee, if given the green light, will begin fundraising immediately, as we have already made 100 growth boards earmarked for such a cause, potentially raising $3,500 alone. And those are the boards that we brought in the back there. Aaron and Nikki made those, and they're quite nice, and we should be able to sell them all off, I would imagine. So that's just one aspect of the fundraising that we have in mind. There's many other things we can do locally as far as fundraising initiatives. We aren't exactly clear on what is available in the form of legacy reserves or government grant funding, but several splash pads in Northern Ontario are partially funded by Trillium, FedNor, OMPF, and various other grants. I'm sure someone at town office can assist with these details and potentially offset a good chunk of the cost itself. We hope we can get you all on board with this and would love to see this happen not only for our local youth, but our seasonal visitors as well. It would be an excellent addition and drawing card to our amazing waterfront and area. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Councilor McCann.
Yeah, thank you for your deputation again this evening. I guess maybe this is a question. Were you looking at perhaps maybe a similar model to the Treetops organization, that kind of the same thing that they did with help from the town? And I realized that they had a piece of property to buy, and yours at this point it's just you know, it's just building materials, I suppose,
right.
and all the engineering and everything that goes into it. But is that the kind of thing you're hoping for then?
At this point, it seems like that would probably be the best route for us to collectively try and get together and do this and not expect the town to foot the whole bill and make it a real community endeavor. Different from Treetops, though, it would be run and owned by the town. It's on town property. The infrastructure is already in place. The property is already there. So it's just a matter of getting the money together, being able to make it affordable to maintain on a yearly basis. I think we estimate somewhere around $12,000 to $16,000 a year for upkeep. And the opening and shutting down is relatively cheap. It's about $1,000 to open it up in the spring and shut it down in the fall. So it's not a huge expense. I mean, you may have recurring maintenance fees that come up. You may have to replace features here and there, but generally they're pretty well built and can sustain a long time.
So a follow-up then, would it be prudent at this time maybe that we could consider adding this to the next general agenda for consideration?
That's something for council to talk about. I have a couple of questions. And one is, I know that the pool, there are people that actively now want to, they feel it's prudent through this election to promote a pool. Do you think that fundraising for a splash pad is going to confuse people with regard to like a wellness recreational center?
I don't think so. I think most people that know what we're shooting for realize the difference between the two. And certainly a splash pad compared to a community recreation center / pool complex is a whole different ballgame. It would also have to involve outlying communities, I'm sure, to help out offset costs as well for a pool complex. But we're trying to keep ourselves separate from that and have our own identity. To that, we've actually named the facility Sound Splash Pad, and we want it to be affiliated with the Wabineau Town Beach. That'd be probably our #1 location that we want to have it set up at. Yeah. But certainly, as far as a pool complex, that's definitely.
Because my next question is the synergies between having a pool and a splash pad. There are communities that do have the two together.
Right.
And in one location. And the reason that they do that is because there are two types of splash pads. One uses municipal water on a regular basis, which in our particular case would deplete our development availability, because we would be using water directly from the system to operate it. Second is to actually create a pool or some sort of system, which a pool already does, okay, which recycles the water and filtrates the whole system. That system costs a lot more money to do because you're basically building a small water filtration plant.
Correct.
That runs in the neighborhood of anywhere between $30,000 and $50,000 a year, depending on the size of the plant. If you put the two of them together, okay, then you would have that. And I'm going to ask you this because I want you to think about it, okay? If you put the two of them together in one location, then you have that availability that you're not using direct water right from the municipal system all the time. You would be using filtered and reconditioned water to do it, okay? And you could put the two of them together.
Yes.
Okay, if you separate them and you do one or the other, then you're creating two particular plants. So it's something that I think needs to be thought about, because there is a cost to the whole thing, and it'd be better to have everything all together in one area, possibly, than breaking it up into two parts. I'd like you to think about that, because if we get two groups going, one and the other, and you know, really and truly, if it ends up being a system where it's the filtration plant and that sort of thing to be able to do it, you know, maybe the other municipalities should be in on this too.
Oh, absolutely, they should, for sure.
Instead of just us alone.
Yeah.
Because it won't be just taxpayers of the town of Parry Sound using it. It's going to be cottagers and people staying at resorts and other people that will come to town to use it. Yeah. And if you have that opportunity for a much larger facility, possibly it works a whole lot better.
The only concern I would have, and I'd be all for it, I mean, I would take a pool complex over a splash pad any day to begin with. I just know it's such a massive undertaking to get that off the ground, and it's been years in the works. Yep. If there is some sort of commitment from town that's, that it will be set, like a date set for something like that to happen, then we would definitely be willing to push our dates back and try and join them both together. Yeah. As it stands right now, if we have to do it on our own, we're willing to start ASAP and
Yeah.
And at least even if we have a reserve fund set up, that we can at least start fundraising and start putting some money aside, at least we can start now rather
Yeah.
than later.
Yeah. If council so wishes, that's what they'll do. I'm just putting that out there as,
Oh, yeah.
as some food for thought.
Yeah.
And, I mean, the town has always been of the position that other municipalities have to be on board if we're going to do this.
Yeah.
Because we can't afford another position. We've got $1 million to spend on the Bob York Community Center this year because we've got to replace the pad.
Yeah.
You know, nobody else is helping us with that.
Yeah. Stocky Center. Stocky Center.
We got the Stocky Center, we got a roof, nobody else is helping us with that, and yet they all enjoy it.
Oh, I know.
You know, they all enjoy the
Same with
arena.
our roads and sidewalks and everything else, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So I mean, it makes sense for sure.
You know, and I've said this before, we've got $131 million worth of assessment in this community that we don't even collect taxes on. We can't, because those are public buildings and other buildings that everyone uses, but we cannot collect a nickel on them. So the ratepayers of this community are having to pay for all of those things, and it's just how much can they actually afford. So, yeah, if I don't mind having a reserve account set up, I think that's probably a good idea, but I'd like to take a look at synergies and see where this can go and build on that.
Right.
Because I think we could end up with something a lot better out of what we have.
Well, like I say, I'm definitely for
Yep.
doing both. If we can make that happen, then certainly we're all on board, for sure.
All right.
And there'll be a lot of happy people.
Councillor Keith. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I had a question. I think the mayor covered some of it already, but my second question was in reference to if you were just talking about a splash pad down at Wabano Beach, in that area, you talk about the fundraising, and that's really important because it says about the buy-in and the partnering indirectly. But I'm wondering if there is any plans for if the money was obtained and a splash pad was done there, put down there, my concern also would be is if there would be, again, some partnershiping of whether it's another organization or what social club, but who's going to assist with any of the operating costs? Because just like anything else, when you put, another piece of infrastructure in, that also means, there's somebody else who's doing the finances of figuring out what the costs are there. There's staff time there, whether it's the employees, whether it's the administration of that. There's the maintenance. I heard about the figure of 12,000 and 1,000 in the beginning and closing, but I'm wondering how accurate their figures are for that. So would you be able to advise me of any of those? Has that been thought out at all? So
I've spoken with one of the members in Penetangmashine, and they have a splash pad similar to what we were proposing here. And it was funded in the same way that we're proposing now. They estimate around $12,000 for their annual operating costs. The opening and closing costs I got from one of the splash pad developers that sell the operation. They actually come and do it themselves. So those numbers are pretty accurate. As far as who foots the bill, it would be the town of Parry Sound because it's at Wabano Beach. It is a town facilities, much like the skate park. Anything else that's town funded would be operated by the town of Parry Sound, but we're willing to try and partner in, get some partnerships going with local clubs, businesses, organizations. A lot of the features at these splash pads, and there's usually 17 to 20 features, can be sponsored by businesses, individuals. So a lot of that can be covered as well. If anything needs to be changed or upgraded, that can be covered as well. So basically, once it's all up and running, it's just your annual upkeep and maintenance.
So just for clarification, and I felt that the committee would be involved in the fundraising, but once it's all up and running, they wouldn't be assisting in any other fundraising to assist with the operation costs afterwards. Is that what basically the plan is right now?
We would try and fundraise as much as we can and have it in reserve funds and try and have it sit there and keep it operating as long as possible. Ongoing operations, I mean, we could always look into having sponsorship for that as well.
Councillor McCann?
Yeah, I'm curious, Mr. Mayor, when you were talking about recycled water, in your research, the splash pads like that in Penetanguishene, do they use recycled water, or do they just run it straight from the tap, or what seems to be the trend for standalone operations?
Most of them that are right on the water use an in and out flow system, which will draw water in from the body of water, treat it appropriately. They have a little small waterworks system. And my mom just actually put one in her resort, and it cost around $30,000. It would probably be a little bit more for something like a splash pad because you're going through a lot more gallonage. But they are able to recycle the water in and out of the lake. I've been told the municipal water, there's an abundance of it. I don't know really how true that is. Certainly I would think using municipal water would be kind of a waste because you're treating it specifically for consumption and you're wasting it on a splash pad, right? So I think it would make more sense to use it, if it is at Wabano, to have a little waterworks system there drawing out of the bay. But I mean, it all depends what everyone decides on or which route we go.
Hey, thanks very much, very interesting.
Councillor Horn.
Thank you for your presentation and your passion for this splash pad. I'm all for the fundraising and the synergy that could be partnered with the pool complex. In terms of fundraising and setting up a reserve account for the town, I just would like if you just contact Christine Gilbert, and I'm not sure about issuing tax receipts to those donors, so I'd just like to have you and Christine maybe talk about that. I don't know what the responsibility in terms of the town would be, but I think it's a great idea to set up that account. Thanks.
Absolutely. Yeah, we wouldn't want to be canvassing anyone and asking for money until we know exactly what we can offer them and that it is actually a go and that we can offer them some sort of receipts back, for sure.
I think that's something that council can talk about tonight.
Okay.
Is the establishment
Basically,
of
all
the
we're
reserve.
asking for is a green light if we can go ahead and then we know that we have you guys on board and we can go ahead with what we want to do.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much,
Yeah.
guys. Appreciate it.
It's nice to see people engaged. It is. I appreciate that.
Like I say, it's out of my comfort zone, but something a lot of us feel very strongly about, and we'd like to see something a little more for the kids in the community and potentially a drawing card from outside of the community, because a lot of people do here, even though we live on Georgian Bay, a lot of people do travel outside of town in the summer to go to these facilities, so something to consider as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Now, where do you want to start? Okay, all right, yeah. So we have a resolution that's moved by Councillor Sonia and seconded by Councillor Horn, that council accepts the tender from W.S. Morgan Construction in the amount of $1,227,000 plus HST for roof repairs and siding replacement at the Charles W. Stockey Center for the Performing Arts. I could build one almost. And Bobby Orr Hall of Fame, this being the only tender received. And council authorized that the expenditure be debentured. Okay. Questions? Discussion? Councillor Sonia.
So can you describe how they're putting a pool on the roof of the Stockey Center? No.
Sorry, it was on my mind at the moment, and it's roof. But you know, the way it looks here, like Rob wrote this out. Remember,
it's 1.2. I was just wondering if either one of you could read out what is happening. Like that's a lot of dough. I want people to know what they're getting.
Ms. Madad, do you want to?
Please don't say roof.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's a large project. It includes roof replacement as well as replacement of the existing hardy board siding. This has been before council back in October, I think it was. We had called for tender. We received one tender. The tender specifications allowed for the option of providing a cost for asphalt shingles or metal roof, And you'll recall that through the discussion of council, there certainly was some interest in exploring further the steel roof, the metal roof option. So I've been in a lot of discussion with our engineer, who's AECOM, and they've gone back to the company that submitted the tender, which is a local company, W.S. Morgan Construction Limited, just to get clarification on the steel piece, and that's what's before you tonight. So it's everything that was before you in October, with the exception that it's the asphalt shingles replaced with the steel. So it includes replacing the hardy board siding with a pre-finished steel siding as well. So all of this is to have better life, better sustainability, durability, given the conditions where it is. It's the fascia board and the soffit. It's everything that is required to basically do the new roof. The existing shingles come off. There's a material that is installed that basically acts as the acoustic buffer, given that it is a steel roof, and if we get a downpour, we don't want a performance that's going on in the performance hall to be impacted by heavy rains on the roof, for example. So it's interesting, and some of council and the mayor may recall, but in the original design that Keith Loeffler, architect, designed, the original design specifications did call for a metal roof. And it was cut at that time due to budget. We just didn't have the budget at the time during construction to go with the metal roof. So asphalt shingles were put on, and this kind of brings us to where we are today. We have ongoing leaks. The roof, the shingles have been compromised. Bits and pieces of it have been done in what we're calling a phase 1. And we have had chronic problems with the hardy board siding right from installation. And there's a thought that there is some relationship between some of the links, some of the leaking between the roof and the siding. So this is what's before you tonight. It's a big price. We had planned to debenture it. There is a possibility of some grant money. I've made application to Department of Canadian Heritage Cultural Spaces for 50-cent dollars. The only condition really is that they can only fund work and expenses if approved. I'm still waiting for approval up until March 31st, 2018, because that's the end of their funding year. They can't carry it over, so that's it. But because we have submitted application already, we can go ahead and start with the project. It just means that we may end up paying for all of it or half of whatever is expended and done up until March 31st, 2018, if that's clear.
Okay. All right.
You're welcome.
Councillor Borneman, then Councillor Keith.
I have a couple of questions. Is this the seam or standing seam?
Your microphone.
Standing seam steel roof, or will this be screwed on?
Through Mr. Mayor, I don't have those details yet at this point. I can certainly find that out and have that discussion with the engineer.
I would only say that from experiences at the airport, the screwed on roofs, every point where there's an opening in a piece of steel, there's a possibility of a leak in the piece of steel. So if at all possible, the seamed roof is the preferred way to go. And I think my other question is for Ms. Gilbert. What does this do to the payback time and the cost on an annualized basis to the debenture that was proposed, adding 400 grand to the tab?
Yeah. Through Mr. Mayor, just looking at the capital budget, I believe what was put in there for debenture was actually 1.44 million. So this, in fact, is less than what had been planned debentured anyway. And I'm sure Ms. Gilbert will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's what had been put in the budget for the debenture.
Well, that's good news. Councillor Keith?
Just one more question, and that would be, seeing as I'm sure we're all tired of hearing about the roof, we just want the roof done right, and let's be happy afterwards. And for me to be happy afterwards, I'd like to know, is there going to be a guarantee? Is there going to be some sort of clear inspection? Like, will there be, how many inspections will we have? What sort of a guarantee do we have so that we're not back at the council table in 8 months' time after the roof is on? It should, hopefully not, but should there be an issue, do we have any sort of reassurance there?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, so in the R&R, it's noted, and this is information that the engineer has provided, so on the general workmanship from the contractor on all items, it's for a period of 1 year. In addition, there are further extended warranties on major components that have been specified. Specifically, there is a 40-year manufacturer's warranty on the steel siding, on the coating itself, so against chipping, cracking, and 30 years on the color and performance of the panels. And that's what they have provided.
I just one follow-up, and I know this one will be appreciated, but have we ever, maybe whether we have in the past or not for this roof, is it possible that there can be photos taken after this roof is all completed so that we have a proof at least of what it looked like close up after it was all done? So at least if there is an issue, we can say, hey, this is what it looked like on such and such a date, a completion date. Is that a possibility even?
Absolutely, we can do that.
Thank you.
Councillor Horn?
Thank you. It's a beautiful facility to upkeep it for future generations, so hopefully future councils aren't having this discussion years from now. We have to do it. The comments that we receive from performers, from audience, it is a great facility. We're all in now. I'm really happy that it's a local company that has the contract, and I was just wondering about the time frame.
Ms. Madaw.
To you, Mr. Mayor, once they get the word approval, should council approve this tonight, they're ready to go. And I believe it was, what was the timeline? 16 to 18 weeks for completion from start date. So that's what they're proposing. So, you know, given that March 31st deadline, we're definitely hoping that we can get a lot of it done, should we get grant approval, because that could be very good for the town.
Councillor McCann had his hand up, and then Councillor Sonia.
Thank you. Lynn, the sound buffering and the acoustic value of this, is this tried and true? Like, do we know that we're not going to be sitting, you know, in a Festival with the Sound concert and it suddenly rains and we really end up hearing the pitter-patter of raindrops on the roof, or is this tried and true?
Through Mr. Mayor, the product that will be used will be or is on the recommendation of the original architects. So as I say, it had been originally allowed for and designed for in the original specifications of the construction of the building. So we're just going with what he is recommending as the designer for that. It always was designed to be an acoustically perfect building, and so you know, we just have to go with his expertise on that.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Sonia? Oh, okay.
I trust that we'll order as much, if approved tonight, we'll order as much materials tomorrow as we can, with assumptions of 10% over and above.
Ms. Gilbert, yes.
Just for your information, Councillor Borneman, the debenture was placed, or what Mr. Pinn had put in was for $680,325 debentured and $730,725 as a federal grant. Okay. So there would need to be a revisiting of the debt. I can't do that right now on the fly, but I could certainly work with Ms. Madaw to figure that out.
Ms. Madaw?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, if we get approval, it's for 50% funding, so that would be very close. Okay.
Anything further? All in favor? And that's carried and opposed. So, we're now at attachment 1, update. Ms. Gilbert, are you starting and leading us on this, or is Mr. Menz? Okay.
Through Mr. Mayor, yeah, I'll start this, and I'm going to turn it over, of course, to Ms. Gilbert. She's going to walk you through the schedules that were attached with the agenda package. She'll start with describing for you where we are now relative to the range that council has set as an acceptable tax increase. And there's been a few changes since council's last meeting, and we'll let you know what they are and where we sit, as I said, relative to the low and the high end of the range. So if you're good, then Christine, to, yeah? Okay.
Would you like me to wait or? Okay.
Just go for it.
Okay. So through you, Mr. Mayor, I did place updated tab 1 for your binders in everyone's mail folder downstairs. The agenda does also electronically have the updated copy. In terms of the determination of tax levy, I will highlight the few items that we have changed. We are still, if you do look on page 6 of your binder, you can see that we are quite close to the low range. There is a change where there is $8,000 sitting as a difference, $8,014. That relates to a request for some assistance in regards to the downtown beautification. And that was requested that it be placed in. If you look at the figure that is present on the screens, you will notice that there is a additional amount that is sitting there. It is now $10,914. That relates to a request that arrived just this week from the planning board, where they were requesting that the levy to the town be $7,000 instead of the $4,100 that was initially placed in the budget. So I have increased that at this point in time for your information to be exactly what they are requesting as the municipal levy. There is some room, you can note it again, it has changed a bit because of that change on page 7 and on the screen. There is a little bit of room where there can be some additions made if you wish to be at the high end of the range. Just as a quick summary, these are the changes that have occurred to the budget since you received it December 5th, the original documentation. For the most part, there has been movement from one area to another. There's been very little impact. The impact that has hit kind of the bottom line, in a sense, on page 6 that is different from what Mr. Pinn presented relates to the change for the planning board levy, as well as the $8,000 for the downtown beautification contribution. There really hasn't, that's pretty much all that's changed.
Any questions?
Yeah, any questions with?
No? Okay. Next, Councillor Horn.
I know that we had received a number of other requests that came in, and there was just discussion about setting up a community count in terms of those asks, and I just wondered if we discuss that at this point, or do you want to wait till later?
I guess, where does that fit within what we've got here tonight?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, as far as my understanding was that we would work through the kind of new items that were added to the budget as well as items that were removed. Yeah. I'm flexible in terms of where council would like to begin. If you'd like to start there, that's
okay.
Fine.
All right. Because we can also talk about that reserve too, so. Mm-hmm. Okay.
So would you like to just
We'll just
Start through the list and-
Start through the list. yeah.
Okay. So on page 8, it's the items considered by staff and removed. Mr. Penn did go through these in the budget meeting in December, explaining some of them. I will rely a little bit on Mr. Menz as well as Mr. Brown and Ms. Middaugh to assist me, as they have been involved in the entire budget process at this point in time. So the first line item is the savings on the operating costs from the old fire hall. That's a reduction in the expenses there, obviously, because we have sold the building. I'll just continue moving until somebody has a, okay. There's some savings on the operating costs of the CN station, again, a sale that occurred. There was the removal of the upgrade of stairs at the municipal building, which was going from the main floor to the floor immediately above, which is one floor below us, the floor where the CAO's office and administration is. That was a capital investment amount that was removed. There is the removal of the expansion of the Wi-Fi downtown. There was also the reduction in the miscellaneous materials for building inspection, a reduction in the books and subscriptions for the building inspector, as well as a reduction in staff training for 1 year for the building inspection. These all tie into the fact that the current building inspector is planning on retirement and obviously will be revisited when that position is replaced. The next item on the list is a reduction in consulting fees for planning. A reduction of the contract for the EDO position to 3/12. This was relating to the recommendation that there be a full-time EDO person being considered later on. Continue.
Yep.
Continue? Okay.
I'm sure there'll be a hand go up if.
That's fine. Reduction in conventions and staff training for economic development. There was a increase, sorry, my apologies. There was a decrease in the revenues on shared bylaw services, which is primarily with Carling. There was also a deferral of the replacement of the retaining wall at the fire hall. There is a reduction in the legal costs for EMS. The town portion would be $60 of those 1,000. A reduction in the miscellaneous contracts for services, again, relating to land ambulance. And another reduction in regards to land ambulance for conventions, conferences, and training. There was also, sorry, was that a hand?
Yep, sorry, Councillor Borneman, go. Oh.
Yes.
Ms. Middaugh?
To you, Mr. Mayor. So that's a reduction just at this point for year 1. It'll be back up after year 2.
Okay. Great. Anything else, or was that good for now? Okay, all right.
Okay. So we are the 4th line from the bottom of page 9. Then there is the removal of Hillcrest Cemetery Chapel and Mausoleum repair.
Councillor Keith?
Yes, I'm just wondering, if we remove that repair, how much longer can we afford to go before it is repaired? Because certainly, you know, how we take care of the cemetery and that building, it certainly says something about your communities. Can I get some advice there, please?
Through your worship,
Mr. Brown? Yep.
we did some major repairs to the chapel last year, so that covered significant savings there. We're fairly confident that we'll be back asking for money for further repairs probably in the next 3 to 5 years. We think that it's in fairly good shape. right now to last for another, for several more years before we have to start investing more money into it.
So just for clarification, the type of repairs that you're thinking about longer term, what area are they in? Like, is the building, are the bricks falling apart in some areas or what? Like it's stone, but what's the scoop?
Through your worship, there was an assessment done on it. I don't have it in front of me, but there was some work for the brickwork that needed to be repointed in certain areas. The stairs needed a better railing, I believe. There was some shingle work that was starting to show signs of deterioration from the big trees that were right beside it. But we're going to be monitoring it over the next year or two to make sure that it continues on. And if we can do our own work on it to keep it going for the next couple of years as a cost saving, that's what we're suggesting.
Yes,
So one last
Councillor.
question, so it's not a safety issue?
Through your worship, not at this time.
Okay, continue.
Okay, so third line from the bottom of page 9, to not proceed with the public water tap. That removed 45,000 from the capital budget. The operation costs for the proposed splash.
I've got a question
Oh,
on that
sorry.
one. Are we going to be supplying any public water then this year?
Through your worship, no, we're not.
Okay. All right. We've got a lot of people that I know we're going to hear from on something, so. Well, yeah, Councillor Keith.
Guess my question would be, if we're not going to have any sort of public water tap anywhere, are we going to be monitoring that situation then, so that we know? Because I think it is pretty important for us to be aware.
Mr. Brown?
Through your worship, we've been monitoring it through complaints and telephone calls, and I could probably count on less than one hand of how many times we've received a call saying, why aren't we providing any water? So it's been very quiet. Now, I'm probably jinxing it, but there have been very few complaints or concerns about a lack of a public water tap.
My comment would be, I'll bet good money that if you put a sign up there, if you have any issue about this public water tap not being available, I bet the phone would be ringing and emails would be off the wall.
Councillor Horn?
I think for me, the $45,000 for a public water tap is probably 0.5% on the tax levy, or almost 0.75% on the tax levy for the ratepayers of Parry Sound. And I just think that we're competing with businesses that provide water, and I'm for taking it out. Thank you.
Let's go over.
If I may, the amount for putting in the water tap may be budgeted at 45,000, but there is also impact on the tax rate. Because water sewer is self-funding, we charge, even for town facilities, we allocate those expenses to those town facilities. And the Bobby Orr Community Center is metered. So as that water flows through, that does increase expenses at the Bobby Orr Community Center for utilities, for your information.
Okay, thank you. Anything further? No? Okay. Continue.
Okay, so the second line from the bottom on page 9 is the operating costs for proposed splash pad for the utilities. The next line is the elimination of the participation in the leisure guide. As Mr. Pinn mentioned, that's moving more to the social media. On to page 10, there's the deferring of the development of the splash pad at Wabano Beach, the $270,000. The deferring of replacement of the irrigation system at
Mr.
Mintz
Wabano Beach.
has
Yeah.
got it.
I would suggest, Mr. Mayor, that this would be the time if council was at all going to consider a reserve contribution, that if you don't do it now, it just might not be there. This is the opportunity.
Well, certainly the opportunity to set up a reserve anyway. So, council, if they want to set up a reserve, we need a resolution or recommendation. Yes, Mr. Mintz.
Again, through this mayor, we do have reserve funds that are dedicated to recreation without being specific. They're in the budget package.
Yeah.
What could be done, I would suggest that if council is in favor of establishing a reserve specifically for a splash pad, that we could look at allocating some of the money that's in an existing reserve and contributing it to a dedicated reserve for a splash pad. But to do that just on the spur of the moment right now, I'm a little reluctant to do that.
But council could agree to set up a reserve.
Yeah, that could be, I would suggest that that be noted formally either as direction or even a resolution.
Yeah. Councillor Keith had her hand up. Is there a seconder? Councillor Borneman? So discussion on setting up a reserve fund. Councillor McCann.
I certainly see the benefit of doing that, but just in the interest of you know, we're talking earlier about getting new requests for funds and such, you know, and they're not all to do with recreation. Would it be easier on the bookkeeping if we had like a common reserve for this type of thing rather than have a different, you know, a different account for every consideration, or is this big enough that it warrants its own?
I would think that we should do that because we've got a public group that's fundraising, so it should be separate. Okay. It's the same with the pool one.
That's fair enough.
Same with the treetops and that sort of thing.
Okay, that's fair enough.
Should be separate. Yeah. Councillor Horn.
So in terms of the ask from the committee about the town putting some money into the reserve, I think if maybe the next budget meeting, Mr. Menz comes back and lets us know in terms of what's in the recreation reserve right now.
I'm hoping that this might be our last budget meeting.
Oh, okay. So can you?
So
yes.
What we can do is all we need to do is set up the reserve account, and then staff can take a look at what's in the recreation reserve and make a recommendation later on. Yeah. So that part of it's fine. Yeah. Mr. Mintz.
We could, just to be clear, we would bring back probably a fairly brief resolution or R&R to council.
Yeah.
And that way it's clear exactly what we're doing.
Yeah, that's right. Ms. Gilbert.
May I ask for some clarification? Are you speaking about setting up a reserve that does not have a bank account associated to it, or a reserve fund where there is a dedicated bank account? The treetops is set up as a reserve fund where there's a dedicated bank account associated.
I'm going to go with Mr. Menz, and then Councillor Keith. Yeah.
Through you again, Mr. Mayor, I'd suggest it be a fund because there are going to be, so it sounds or it appears, donations raised from the community that they at least should earn interest, if not the town's contribution.
Yeah. Councillor Keith?
Mr. Menz just read my thought. Thank you.
Okay. Anything further? So what do you have for an actual resolution there now?
The pretty simple at this point, as you were suggesting, just to establish a reserve fund for the splash pad.
Okay.
And the understanding is, I'll make note of it in the minutes, that staff will bring a report recommendation forward regarding the establishment of the reserve.
Yeah. Yes.
I would just like to point out to you, Mr. Mayor, that I do have the detailed list of reserve and reserve funds available. They are on the screen if somebody is curious about where those stand at the moment.
We'll come to that, I think, when we
Yeah,
get
that's
to
fine.
Yeah. Yes, Councillor McCann.
Okay, so I'm just looking for clarification. So we agreed to establish the reserve fund. The money that was in the budget here, is this all going to be allocated to this now or later, or is that what? I'm just trying to understand what we're doing here.
We've taken that out of the budget.
Yeah, yes.
Okay, so there will be a reserve set up for fundraising purposes. okay? And staff will come back with something later on what we can put into it. So basically, it's moved by Councillor Keith, second by Councillor Borneman, that a dedicated reserve fund be established for a splash pad. Anything further? All in favor? That's carried. Okay, do you remember where you were?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. We will
I'm
be,
glad.
again, on page 10, and we will be the second line in the table, which is the deferring of the replacement of the irrigation system at Wabano Beach. That was removed, 36,000. There is a deferral of the new 1-ton truck that the plan is to upgrade a future planned replacement in 2019, a removal of 75,000. There was the item to not proceed with the sale Parry Sound trail repairs. That was a reduction of 50,000.
Just while we're on that, if there is a safety issue in any particular point, are we going to have that marked or tell people to go another way?
Through your worship, we can take a look at it when the snow goes, but
Yeah.
there is a safety concern there. We had barricaded it, we had flagged it.
Okay.
Those kind of things get tossed aside sometimes, so we'll try our best to monitor it.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Okay, the next line is the removal of the Olympia room improvements. That is at the Bobby Orr Community Center. There is a reduction to the town's share of POA revenues for service changes. There's the reduction in the travel costs for POA. Again, the town is only saving a portion of that. And reduction in conferences and meetings for the provincial offenses. Again, the town would be saving a portion of that. Shall I proceed to the next? Okay.
Yep.
So starting on page 11 are the new operating initiatives that have been placed in the budget by staff. The first, there was an increase in the funding from the province for the OMP funding. If I recall correctly, that is somewhat offset by some increases in the costs for OPP that Mr. Pinn had pointed out previously. The next line is an increased rental of municipal property to reflect new agreements that the town has. Increased investment income to recognize more active investing that has occurred and will be continuing to occur. There is an addition of a corporate communications officer of 85,800, and I believe that was approved in October 2017. There's the consulting fees for the CAO and treasurer recruitment being funded from reserves of 50,000. There's the election expenses for 2018 election. There's the license purchase for software to create financial statements and improve audit processes. This is an ongoing license for new software received in 2017. There's the service agreement for the new mail machine, which we purchased in 2017. The creation of a shared GIS technician or shared services of 40,000. There is an increase in expenses for annual funding to council to provide grants outside of the MAP program of 9,000. The design for the new coat of arms for the town of Parry Sound, 5,000. There's increased revenue for the Phonom conference, which offsets expenses. There's increased revenues for the building department. Funding for an NOHFC intern for tourism. Funding for surveys on 2 properties, so that's an increase to an expense. Repairs to the highway entrance sign of $1,000. Increase funding to the facade improvement program of 45,000, which brings the total up from the current to 70,000. Is that correct? to 70,000.
So while we're on that particular one, what did we spend last in 2017?
Through Mr. Mayor, we had a budget of $25,000 and we spent pretty much that.
Yeah. And what was the original proposal for?
So the original proposal for 2018 was 80, and then that had been reduced by 10, so we're at 70 now, is what is proposed before you.
Well, I'm thinking if 70? I'm just thinking, what if we went to 40,000? At least we've got an increase. Oh.
Wasn't me for a change.
Wasn't. What if we went to 40,000 on that and instead of the 70? How does council feel? Councillor Horn? 40? Yeah. All in favor of 40? Okay, carried. So we'll go with 40. So
So a total of 40?
total of 40. Yeah.
All right. So picking up page 12, the second row from the bottom. Increase the contract for EDO, 4,500. The cost for hosting the Phenom conference offset by the revenue mentioned previously. Moving on to the start of page 13. An intern for tourism marketing funded by NOHFC, 40,000. An increase to the advertising for the 2018 for the cruises of 1,500, just as Mr. Penn mentioned previously, because there are more ships arriving and coming in 2018. Increased waterfront advisory committee miscellaneous materials and signage expense by 7,000. A feasibility study for a Parry Sound Innovation Park, 60,000. The implementation of a full-time economic development officer, 9/12 of the year, 76,600. Increased repairs for Big Sound Marina, as well as increased repairs for the town dock. An $8,000 contribution to the downtown beautification project. This would be looking at $8,000 per year for 2 years, this year and next. That is a new item from the December 5th chart.
Mr. Mans?
Mr. Mayor, through you, and this refers to, on the agenda 941, it talks to attachment number 2, and there was a letter from the DBA supporting the landscaping project. It will actually be on, as correspondence on the January 16th council agenda. So this, if you recall, the proposal was from Ms. Ryan was a $32,000 project, and this the 8,000 is 1/4 of that. So half of the 32,000 would be spent this year, 8 this year by the town, and proposing that the DBA matches that 8,000, and then the same again for next year.
My only comment on this particular one is we haven't had, I think, an official response from Mr. Brown as to the impact of some of those areas on snow storage. And because some of the areas, I think they look great, but in the wintertime could propose some difficulty. Mr. Brown.
Through your worship, I agree, and you and I have chatted about that. There is one section I believe that they're going to start with, and that's at the James Street lot where the 4 pillars are. Excuse me. Staff feel that that might be the best place to, shall we say, experiment with something like this. We've told the beautification committee that snow is going to be piling up on top of this, and we can't be creative as far as removing it. And we've given them fair warning that some of this Some of the materials, some of the plants may be damaged, destroyed, whatever. But having said that, we also want to be cognizant of the fact that we may have to change or alter our snow removal in that one area. So that may increase the cost slightly for the contractor to come in and be creative on how to remove it. Or we just may have two great big huge piles there all winter long. So it's kind of we're not sure what we're going to get into. It might be an experiment, and that's, I think, another reason why they're considering just one particular spot on this particular project to start.
Good to know. Thank you. Any further questions or no? Okay.
Okay, so again, picking up on page 13, approximately halfway through the chart, a development charges study of $50,000. Again, I believe this is a new item on the chart.
That is an item that I've asked to put on here. I think that there's a number of projects in the works right now and people that are looking at different things that would be grandfathered, and you know, certainly those in the next year or two or whatever to get their proposals in. But at some point, okay, we've got to pay the piper for upgrades to our sewage treatment plant, possibly water treatment plant, and there's only one way that we're going to be able to fund that, and instead of going back to the ratepayer all the time, and that is through development charges like other communities do. We're getting to a point where are we going to get the money? So it's something that I think council's going to have to take a look at. I'm not saying it's going to possibly happen next year or the year after, but down the road, maybe 2, 3, 4 years, we're going to have to begin to take a serious look at it. Again, that's how other communities are funding projects like that and development, but if we don't look at it, we're not planning, I don't believe we'd be planning properly for our future. Councillor McCann.
So I don't have a problem with that, but I'm just wondering, for the $50,000, what is it that we're studying to sort of come to some conclusion as to how we would proceed here?
Mr. Mintz?
So a study is required. You can't just say, hey, let's charge some arbitrary figure. So you have to have a proper study, terms of reference, requests for proposals, and it would look at your various, at your 10-year capital forecast, your long-term forecast for capital projects, and a basis for funding those. So it's a very involved process. The 50,000 is a number. It might be low, might be high, but it is a fairly exhaustive process. It would be funded from we do have reserve funds that this can be funded from. It is not proposed to be on the tax levy at this point, right, Christine?
That is correct.
So if you are going to have lot levy charges, you have to do a study. This money has to be spent.
Councillor Borneman? Oh, okay. Councillor Horn?
I think it's a really great idea in terms of moving the municipality forward, and I think it's proactive, and I think it should be done sooner than later.
Any further comment? Councillor Keith?
I know there's two different viewpoints in reference to development charges, but I guess what my concern would be is when the budget's completed, if this is approved tonight, and I can respect that, is that maybe there should be, when we get to finally approving the budget and the whole process is completed, something like that where it says development charges study. I think it's important for the taxpayer to know the idea that therefore this would not be a cost that the taxpayer is paying for. I think that often the taxpayer afterwards doesn't really understand. They know what their levy is, but they don't really see what their benefits are. And knowing what the benefits and if there's going to be a study down the road, who's actually paying for that those, what the costs are down the road, them knowing that's pretty important. So if they know, for example, down the road that if others are paying for development fees, then it doesn't come out of their tax levy. I think that's really important. So I think this point just kind of hit me that it's really important for the taxpayer to know what the benefits are afterwards at the end of the budget.
Well, that's what the study would do.
I recognize that, but what I'm saying is when a budget is finally completed and when it's finally passed, I think that if it's presented on the website and something in that section there clearly explains what development charges study means in a simpler fashion, I think that can be helpful to a person. That's all I'm saying.
We can explain that, yeah. Mr. Mans, did you have something you want?
Just to add that, I agree, we can explain that. We usually do a budget summary, a highlight after the budget is approved of the main features of the budget, and we can address that point.
Any further? On a different issue? Okay, all right.
I'm going to jump back up the page a little bit here to the feasibility study with the Innovation Park and ask the question if that's happening on the same sort of basis and if out of reserves and where we're going with that exactly.
Okay. Somebody have an answer?
Through Mr. Mayor, I'm not sure what the source of funding is. We might have to dig in a little deeper just off the top on that.
That's not legislative, that's not required.
Correct.
Do we have a gut feeling where we're going with this at this point? Or is this to kind of validate the stuff that the work that the team's been doing before we make a much larger commitment?
Through Mr. Mayor. It had been discussed previously about the notion, the concept of an innovation park. And it came about when we were talking about the 23 acres specifically that the town has over on Parry Sound Road extension area. So talking about these 23 acres, talking about an innovation park, but we don't really know what that is, what the scope of it is. Is there a market? Is it feasible? Would that be the best site theoretically? So the idea behind the feasibility study was to further explore and examine what are we talking about when we're talking about innovation park for the community? Does it make sense? Would there be a return on the investment? And where's the best location? So that was the intent of this.
Mr. Mann?
And just to add, regarding the source of funding, the intent would be to apply for senior government funding, probably FedNor, Len, both, yeah. So I believe we might find somewhere a revenue line for to offset at least part of these costs, but we'll have to get back to you on that.
Okay. Anything further? Okay. Continuing on.
Okay, so again, returning to the bottom of page 13, the fourth line from the bottom. The adjustment for the OPP billing for 2015 and 2016 years, my understanding from Mr. Pinn is that is an adjustment that they made. It would be a one-time cost. There's the purchase of hazmat equipment for mutual aid of $10,000. There is the road needs study funded by OSIF funding of $50,000. There's the increased funding for summer students to reflect longer time served. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, Councillor McCann.
Sorry, I'm just, the road needs study, can you tell us a bit about what that is all about?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to defer to Mr. Brown.
This is, through your worship, this is part of the asset management overall plan that the province is dictating that we do. there has never been an actual road needs study for Parry Sound. And what it does is it takes out the guesswork of what the priority is and what roads need to be done first, second, third. We can convey that as staff, but this gives a new eye to what we need to do and what the priorities are. So it's something that it's like a living document in the sense too, that we can review it again in 10 years from now or in 15 years from now. But it's a great tool to have when funding is becoming available for upgrading roads, changing the type of road, changing the quality of road, that kind of thing.
Okay, so that sounds good.
Just on that, just so you know, the province and the feds are tightening up on, they want to see these asset management plans and priority lists when they're doing this. So funding becomes available. If you don't have your act in order, you don't get money. So.
No, it certainly makes sense. Would this study then be done this year in 2018?
Through your worship, absolutely. As soon as the snow goes, we would have the contractor on site doing the work.
Thank you.
Okay. Continue on.
So just the final point at the bottom of page 13, increased funding for the summer students to reflect longer time served. Some are starting earlier and ending later than the typical summer months. Starting at the top of page 14, an increase to the gravel surface maintenance due to increased washout from storms, $5,000. The legislated bridge needs study funded by OSIF, $65,000. The engineering for the railway crossing to review the whistle cessation, $20,000. Additional staff at the waste transfer site will allow for household hazardous waste year-round and also improves the safety of staff there, $77,400.
Question on that one. If we're going to be doing this year-round, okay, is there going to be some further contributions from the surrounding municipalities that also are able to tip there?
If I may, through your worship, absolutely.
Okay.
The municipalities, we put them on, we've requested the chance for funding, additional funding, and they're all for it.
Okay, good.
But it's sort of a chicken and egg thing. They want to make sure that Parry Sound is going to be proceeding with this. But I've been speaking to my counterparts in all the other municipalities, and they are on board, and they will support it.
Good. Okay. Any further questions? No? Councillor King?
You read my mind.
Ooh.
For the question.
All right.
Okay.
Continue?
Continue.
So page 14, the fifth line from the top. Additional revenue from municipal partners for operation of household hazardous waste year-round. There is an increase of $4,000 for retrofitting the lighting at the operations yard building to become LED. There's the annualized cost of a community recreation programmer. It's the net increase. Provide funding for an intern at the hub for community programming, 5% of the cost, $2,000. Increase the cost for summer students to reflect actual as well as extended timeframes beginning of May to Thanksgiving. That's for Parks and Recreation. The previous one was specific to operations. Replacement of the wood benches with IPE, $5,000. Repairs and maintenance on the fitness trail at the CP trestle over the river, and that is $5,000. I believe at the last meeting it was mentioned that is to be working with the biosphere to remove invasive species. Starting at the top of page 15, painting of the beach house at Wabano Park, $3,300. Replace the fountain pump at Market Square Park, $5,000. Repair the warning track at Kinsman Park Diamond, $11,000. Replace the buoy lines for swimming enclosure area at Wabano Beach, $5,000. Replace the linen stock for rentals at the Bobby Orr Community Center, $1,000. The interest cost for newly issued debt on the Big Sound Marina Dock B replacement, $3,805, pardon me. The purchase of self-watering flower baskets and more hardware for banners on light poles. This was, we did receive pre-budget approval for the $14,500. And the new interest on the debt for the Bobby Orr Community Center roof replacement, $2,942.
Okay. Councilor McCann.
Just a very, very quick question. The replacement of the fountain at Market Square Park seems to be a problematic thing there. Is there a whole new design going in there, or are we just replacing or fixing what is there?
Ms. Madaw?
Through Mr. Mayor, it's not actually a replacement. We have a leak directly underneath the pad of that whole fountain. So that's what we need to get to and fix.
Okay.
That is the end of the tax-supported new initiatives. So the next page is page 16, which is the non-tax-supported new initiatives. So the first is staffing reorganization. So the town cost would be 16% of this. It relates to the provincial offenses, the new court manager position. There's the promotional items for hosting the MCMA conference. The town cost would only be a portion. Again, it's relating to provincial offenses. We host, Mr. Pinn indicated we host that every 5 years. It's on a 5-year cycle. There's the infiltration and inflow study for storm and sanitary systems, a one-time cost of $50,000. Provide funding for the repairs of the bulk water station, $1,000. And the membrane tank coating review and plant efficiency review for the water treatment plant. And that's $57,000.
Mr. Brown?
Just a spelling error, Your Worship. It says membrane tank coating, it's membrane tank coating.
Tank? Okay.
And that is the end of the non-tax supported new initiatives, which brings us to the end of those highlighted tables.
Mr. Mintz.
So, through Mr. Mayor, so Christine, could you just be clear about where we are with, there are the items, I think that Councillor Horn mentioned, like with those new items that have been requested of council and where we are relative to council's range with what is we've looked at right now. There weren't really any, there was one substantial change with the facade program, and I don't expect you to have punched through the new numbers yet. But before that, we are, if you can bring us back to that, I think it was the first page of the page 3.
So unfortunately, I've lost the big screen, and I'll let Cal take care of that. I have already put through the change for the facade program. So the new figure, as soon as I can see it, is that we have room of about 19,000. Yes, we have room of $19,086 to hit the low end of the range. So we are actually coming with amounts lower than that bottom range of the tax calculation.
So that would be 1.8% plus 1.5?
1.5, yes.
Yeah. Mr. Matt?
No, that's where I was going to.
Oh, okay. So council has a, are you happy with that? Or do you want to add another $1 million? Or do you slash $1 million? We can come in pretty much on target with everything. So there's the 1.8 for infrastructure, and 1.5 would actually increase the overall budget for everything else. Yeah. If you're happy with that, I need a mover and seconder. Councillor Keith and Councillor Horn. Discussion on that. Councillor Borneman.
What that amounts to, and where that is accounted for in this, where, is it show up in monies that are going to reserves, or is, you know, just where is that found in this process?
Mr. Mann.
I'll take a first run at it anyway. The 1.8% generates, well, like exactly a good 180,000 at least. And so every year, so last year was the first year, 180,000. So this year, we would be raising the 180,000 plus this year's 180. So it compounds every year, which is helps significantly toward like in 10, even within. I was going to do this before council. How quick at this rate it would come to generate $1 million. It's less than 5 years. You know that we would have $1 million for infrastructure that we wouldn't have otherwise. It's probably three times. But I don't want to throw a number out, but it generates $1 million at $180,000 a year fairly quickly. Like a $200,000 over 5 years is $1 million. So this is something, you know, closer to 4 years that we would be generating that $1 million. So your second part of the question, where that money is going actually, it goes to support through contributions to reserve, the building up of reserves for infrastructure. So we're able to do their fleet replacement and do some of the capital works through this $180,000 that we're generating. If we didn't have that, there have to be alternate sources of revenue.
That's the like that particular aspect of a budget is what AMO had predicted, that the majority of municipalities in Ontario would have to increase their budget by 8.5% for infrastructure funding every year for 10 years to be able to meet the infrastructure payment needs that they do. Now that goes for capital costs and operating costs on some of that. And thank goodness when we did when Mr. Pinn did some of the work on it, that 1.8% would at least cover or help with the majority of ours, not 8.5%. Councillor Bourne.
Just for myself only, speaking more as a taxpayer than somebody sitting at the table, I think I'd be most comfortable if I could see, you know, we have about, I don't know how many accounts, but I would be liking to see how that money, you know, where it goes once it gets into the pot and how it's used, rather than just being lumped into a general account. I think that's an open and, you know, a more open and transparent way of doing that.
I think staff can work on that, but what this does is for many years, council would be in the position where all of a sudden an infrastructure upgrade would have to be done and you would have to increase the budget by a lot more because you didn't have the money sitting there. So this is helping to balance that off through the prioritization of capital infrastructure that needs to be done. So I hear what you're saying, and I think staff can do that, but it is a necessity. And if you don't, you're going to pay the piper a little later on with a lot more. Councillor Keith and then Councillor Horn.
Yes, so just a quick comment, and that would be, it goes back to my statement earlier. I think when a budget is passed, and for example, this 1.8% for the infrastructure, I think it just shows again how, I'm not suggesting that we aren't trying, but I think it needs to be, as the comment about not only transparency, but clear and in simple terms so that people can clearly see that 1.8% infrastructure and the compounding, what it's going for. So I do think at the end, it needs to be explained in clear and more simple terms so anybody reading it can clearly understand. So I think that would be of benefit to us.
Councillor Horn and then Councillor McCann, and then you can.
I think the questions that we all get around the table here is the affordability of living in the town of Parry Sound and the budget increases that we have. I think this is a budget that addresses a number of areas so that we can do those infrastructure costs. And I think people forget about everything that's under the ground that we're responsible for, the roadways and the lights. And I think, you know, over the last few years, we've done a really good job in trying to manage people's money, and we do hear that all the time. And I understand about the cost of increases, and it affects everybody, just not the tax levy, but the hydro costs and the costs of living. But in order that we keep improving our town and we keep developing our town, I think it's just a necessity that we have to go through. And it is in terms of that improvement, and we're looking forward to having a town that has really great infrastructure that our kids and grandkids can enjoy in the future.
Yeah, just to add on to what you're saying, you know, and I've said this before, if previous councils back in the late 70s and 80s would have started this renewal on 100-year-old infrastructure, we wouldn't be in the same position today that we are now. And, you know, to compound that, as I mentioned earlier in the meeting, you know, we have $131 million worth of assessment that we can't collect any taxes on. So the ratepayers of this community shoulder that burden. And that burden is carried to support the rest of the area. And, you know, you know, when we try to reach out our hand for a little bit of help, it shouldn't be slapped, because we're supporting a lot of infrastructure and a lot of buildings that those people use. So, Councillor McCann and then Mr. Mintz.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I certainly agree 110% with what you're commenting on there. This is a bit of a sidebar. Some time ago, this council endorsed something that AMO was working on in terms of going to the province and hoping that if the provincial sales tax portion of the HST was increased by 1%, that would go towards infrastructure and other, I guess, costs in various municipalities. Do we know where that's at right now, or this is a bad year in which to ask this question, being that there's a provincial election?
It's a terribly bad year to ask that question.
But it might be a good year, though.
Yeah. Mr. Mintz, you had.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, just to note that regarding this issue regarding the 1.8% and explaining that to the public, I've made a note of it in the minutes, and we'll do our best to clarify in relatively simple terms how this works, where it's going, what the intention is.
Okay. So the resolution was moved by Councillor Keith and seconded by Councillor Horn that the 2018 operating and capital budget be approved as reviewed and presented at this evening's meeting, and that that the budget bylaw be submitted to council accordingly. Okay. Any further discussion on this? All in favor then? That's carried, none opposed. I think that's it. Thank you, everybody. Staff, council, members of the public, media.